Morning, everyone. Hello. So, yes, we're going to be discussing Nigel Farage and Reform UK again today. Although we've had a little comment about the badges as usual. There, I will introduce you some new badges. As some of you may know, I got married last week. Would you like to see our cake? This is the cake we had. Where has it gone? There we go. We had badges on the cake toppers. But there we go. Right. So. Nigel Farage. So yes, all the news at the moment is Reform UK or the chair of Reform UK, Zia Yusuf, we'll have to see how long he remains chair. He's got lots of talk about how they're going to turn it into a proper political party. You know, with the ability to bin the leader and all the rest of it. Now, at the moment, I don't think Nigel Farage will be too concerned because he enjoys cult-like status amongst Reform UK supporters. However, I don't imagine in the long term he really wants Reform UK turning into a proper political party. So we'll see how that goes. But one thing which I absolutely do believe that they're going to do. I mean, they're talking about targeting. Well, they're talking about, oh yeah, we've got this plan to put Nigel Farage in Downing Street in 2029. So they reckon they're going to form a government after the next general election. It's like, okay, sure. But one thing I absolutely believe is they're going to be targeting Wales, not Wales that swim in the sea, although some Welsh people do swim in the sea, but Wales, the country to the west of England. And the reason for this, of course, like if we look at what happened in the general election this year, so Reform UK got a large slice of the vote. They got the third largest slice of the vote of any individual party. They got 14.3% of the vote. And they got 0.8% of the seats in the House of Commons. Well, this is a huge mismatch. In fact, the disparity between share of the vote and percentage of seats won was the worst in this election than we've known, I think, for maybe forever. But certainly in modern times, it's like absolutely catastrophic. And so there really should be way, way more calls for electoral reform, really, because this is disgraceful. This is not will of the people stuff. And Reform UK certainly were bleating about it. So why would they be targeting Wales? Well, because in 2026, as some of you will know, some of you may not know, there's going to be the Welsh parliamentary elections. In fact, we've got, Wales and Scotland are going to have, of course, parliamentary elections before we get to the next UK general election, obviously. But the Welsh elections are going to be taking place under the next Senedd elections under full proportional representation, which means that if Reform UK can get a large slice of the vote, they should be able to get a number of seats roughly proportional. But there we go. So, in fact, if we have a look here, because I've got the Welsh results. So, Reform UK actually got a larger slice of the results, the share of the vote, in Wales than they did across the UK in general. And again, part of the reason for this, I haven't seen detailed analysis on this, but I'd strongly suspect it's because Reform UK is an extremist party. Where do parties like that do best? Where there's deprivation, because people, who look at this and they'll see, particularly, I think, in Wales, because you will have had people saying, well, nationally we had a Conservative government, but in Wales they had a Labour government, and it's like, well, there's still these deprived areas, what's going on? So you naturally turn to parties that offer more extreme solutions. So the share of the Reform UK vote in Wales was a little higher than nationally. And Sarah there saying, surely this is an argument for no reform. No, we should have electoral reform. We should have... this is not like... reform. Remember what Reform UK exists for. It exists to try and steer the Conservative Party towards more extreme policies. Reform UK are not seeking to form a government. They're not going to. They say they are. They say they are. Then they're not. Because that's ridiculous. You know, if you think about it, in terms of their general plan to put Nigel Farage in Downing Street by winning the next general election, like, okay, let's go down many reasons why this is just not going to happen. First of all, they've got like, okay, they're getting 14% of the vote at the moment, but that is because we've had 14 years of Tory ruin. There's huge levels of deprivation, huge dissatisfaction with the state of politics. People don't believe established politics is really serving their needs, and they're right about that. In a few years' time, I'm not going to say everything's going to be marvellous again, but things are going to be better. So if Reform UK got 14% of the vote this year and like 5 MPs, if people's standard of living has improved noticeably at the next general election, 2028, 2029, whenever it is, why would more people vote Reform UK? Why would more people vote? Because people vote for the extreme policies when they think things are so broken that established politics isn't working, like the moderate politics isn't working. So they say, well, we need something more extreme. So if all of a sudden things are working better, even if it's not, you know, even Labour say they're going to need 10 years. And I'll bet you there's still things not working in 10 years' time. But in 5 years' time, things will be better. So you won't get as many people voting Reform UK. It's absolutely ludicrous. But the other thing as well is they've said that, like, Zia Yusuf, who's the Reform Party chair, has said in an interview recently, the problem is they don't have the grassroots. Now, I've been saying this for a long time. They cannot have the sheer number of people going out, knocking on doors, stuff like that. They don't have that. He said himself, they only had a real proper ground operation in like 4 seats, and they won those 4 seats. They sneaked another one as well, as it happens. But they can't compete with the other parties, even like the smaller parties like the Lib Dems and the Greens, in terms of the number of people going out, knocking on doors, delivering leaflets, things like this. They can't do it. They don't have the operation. It's like, no, because they were just basically created from funding of dubious source, some of it in rubles, no doubt. And so they've said they're going to target local elections to build that up. Again, it's like not going to happen. At the moment, they've got, I can't remember how many councillors they've got. Have they got like 7 They've got a small number of councillors. I think it might even still be in single figures. I can't remember exactly. It's a really, honestly, tiny number of councillors. And if you think about it, so the Lib Dems have about 3,000 councillors across the country. They've got about 3,000 council. I think it's just under 3,000 council seats. And the Lib Dems are not claiming that they're going to form a government in the next election. You know, they don't even try, because that would be ludicrous. No one would believe it. So first of all, it tells you something about how stupid Reform UK think their voters are. That they can say, oh yeah, we're going to come from nowhere to like form a government at the next election. But where they can genuinely, in terms of the things they say they want to do, where they do have a credible chance is at the Welsh elections, because they say they want to form the official opposition in the Welsh Parliament. Well, that is possible. Because if you look at these, now this was general election voter figures. Obviously, people vote differently in Westminster elections to Senedd elections, right? Because, you know, it is different. It is different. But if we look at the and I don't know exactly what the polling is yet for the Welsh parliamentary elections. It won't mean much until close to the time anyway. But if we look at the way people did vote in the general election, 16.9% for Reform UK and only 18% for the Welsh Conservatives. Now, if you would imagine, by the way, that there's a good chance that after the 2026 elections, a coalition government of Plaid and Labour will form. So Plaid themselves may, well, again, they may or may not want to. I mean, the last Parliament, they formed an alliance which then got broken a bit. It's quite weird. In the Scottish and Welsh parliaments, the dominant party formed an alliance with another party, and both of them broke it within a matter of weeks of each other, didn't they? Which was very weird. Is PMQs back on this week? Certainly should be, yes. Parliament is back, so yeah, there should be a PMQs tomorrow. I'm not aware that Keir Starmer's out of the country, so yes, I think PMQs will be on. Plaid need more seats. Well, Plaid will get more seats because it will be, because that's the other thing that will change the way people vote, because in a first past the post system, you sort of force people to vote tactically to an extent. There's always, although we talked about the huge levels of tactical voting taking part in this election, there's always a certain level of tactical, which we don't even call tactical voting. You know, in a general election, people sort of know that a lot of people aren't really voting for their MP, they're voting for the national government. And then they know that national government's between Labour and the Conservatives. So you get an awful lot of people who vote for one or the other of those, specifically because there's, you know, they want to vote for the government. So they're not necessarily voting for Labour or the Conservatives. They may be just voting against the other one. Whereas, you know, in the Welsh elections with the current system, it's more spread. People don't always think like that. And the other thing, because they're used to having to work in sort of coalition or with alliances anyway. But with proportional representation, you could really get a very, very different attitude to voting, as long as most voters in Wales realise that the system is different and how it's different. Because remember, we haven't really had this in the UK. The only time we've had proper proportional representation is with European elections, and not a lot of people pay attention to those. So this will be the first time where full proportional representation is being used to elect members of a national parliament in this country. But it's so you know, it could well be that people's attitude to the way they're going to vote changes quite significantly. We'll have to see how that is. Obviously, from Welsh Labour's point of view, what they, just like the Scottish Labour need, they will need the Westminster Labour government to now start delivering. They're probably none too keen on this idea of this harsh budget this year, but they will certainly expect some shiny things next year leading into the 2026 elections. Alec Barrett, £5 super chat, thank you, says there was a lot of tactical voting in Wales. Labour vote share for the Senedd is going to go down. Plaid go up from the latest Senedd polling. Yeah, as I say, I mean, the polling won't mean a lot, I think, until close to the time. And I think part of the reason for that, I think there's two main reasons for that I've just touched on, but I'll just go over again. First of all, people's view of different parties is also influenced by the sort of national party, the UK party. So Labour's performance in government, nationally, as in Westminster, that is, I'm going to have to distinguish between the two when I'm talking about Wales, as in Keir Starmer's government, they can actually boost Welsh Labour's standing if they deliver. If they deliver in Wales, and they can show that there's I mean, obviously they can't deliver everything by 2026. They can't even deliver everything by 2029. But they can certainly show people that things are getting better, and this is our plan. And in order, you know, and they will push very heavily in order to maximise the benefits we really want governments that see eye to eye. Now, it won't result, of course, in a Welsh majority government in Wales. I mean, that didn't happen under the old system. It's certainly not going to happen now. But that could work in its favour. The other thing that will change it, as I say, is the nature of proportional representation. And that could do it the other way around. That could have more people voting Plaid, or it could have more people voting for someone like Reform. If Nigel Farage is going there and saying, look, you know, we in the Westminster elections, because it's got this crap system, we only got like 1% of the seats when we got 40% of the vote. But Nigel Farage is going to go around Wales. Sorry, he's going to be visiting Wales. I'm sorry about that. It's not my fault. But the Reform UK are going to be going to Wales and pushing that very heavily. The idea that every vote you give us gives us more seats because, not literally true, but, you know, if they get 17% of the vote, there's a good chance they'll get roughly, it's not going to be exactly the same, but they will get roughly the same proportion of seats. And there's going to be more seats, of course. There's going to be 96 seats, goes up by about a third. And that's often what happens when you go to a full proportional representation system. You do, and that's going to be one of the sticking points I feel for Westminster. It's like, oh, so we'd need even more MPs. Ideally, yeah, you would need even more MPs. That shouldn't be a problem. Just get a better parliament. I actually think the actual houses of parliament are the biggest barrier to getting electoral reform in this country. The fact that it already can't accommodate the number of MPs we have. And I think if we had electoral reform, I think we're going to end up with a botched system whereby we try and keep the same number of MPs, which won't be ideal at all. But anyway, there we go. So they're saying 16% of people are willing to live with evil if it lets them do scroll for an hour before bed every night. I mean, a lot of people don't. I mean, people vote for Reform UK for several reasons. We know that overall the biggest reason is anti-immigration, but you also got to understand people don't. Majority of people aren't doing it for evil reasons. They actually just believe the nonsense because it's on a childish level. It sort of works in their head, and nobody is. Graham, they're saying not in Doncaster. No, we need a proper modern parliament in Doncaster. I'm telling you, it would solve almost all of the problems. All of the problems. But there we go. So, but yeah, so that's, you know, that is why I think you will expect, that's of all the things Reform UK say they're going to do, that's the one I believe, that they're going to push and try to be the official opposition in Wales, because that's possible. It won't be much of an opposition, mind you. It will be quite a small opposition, but technically, if they're the largest party in opposition, which is absolutely doable, because if you look at this voting intention, and again, it will be different for the Senedd things, but there's no reason why Reform UK couldn't boost it a little. And the Tories could still fall further, because depending on who they select, none of the leadership candidates, to me, really sound like they've got a plan. And I am trying to temper my view with the fact that at the moment they're focusing on appealing to members, and members are not like voters, and I appreciate that. But when I think back to the last Labour leadership contest, and I think back to Keir Starmer, who had his detailed list of policies, I know people go, oh, but he dropped them all, didn't he? No, he didn't. He dropped a small handful. But when you go back to that, and he had that detailed list of policies, and I'm just going to try and find a thing now. I made a little note somewhere. And here it is. So of the 10 pledges Starmer made, they're all still there. But there were little details within them. Of those little details, 94% of them made it through into government. But if you think about the current Conservative, regardless of how many were dropped and how many weren't, if you think about the current Conservative leadership candidates, none of them have presented a policy platform at all. You've got some of them saying, oh, we should leave the European Convention on Human Rights. And then you've got some other ones going, no, we shouldn't. Like, ironically, at the moment, Kemi Badenoch seems to be of the view, no, we shouldn't. Or at least she's pouring water on it. They don't. I don't know what they haven't. They're not presenting any policies at all. They're just, you know. James cleverly said, "Oh, I would resurrect the Rwanda plan." Would you? Why? You know, but none of them have presented, like, all of them are just talking about those sort of policies that lost them the election. So I can absolutely see the Welsh Conservatives falling further behind, as again, because just as long as the Keir Starmer government looks like it's delivering, that will boost Welsh Labour. If the Conservatives just plough a pointless furrow in opposition, then that can hurt Welsh Conservatives. But there we go. So what blows my mind is that the Tories don't even try in London. They always seem to put forward the worst candidate possible. I mean, you get that a lot in politics in general. I mean, if we look at some of the last few Labour leaders, they've not been good at campaigning. They've had their own qualities in some ways, but they've not been election winners. And it should be like, but I'll tell you what I find really incredible. If you think back to 2019 when the Conservatives won that majority, and and it was very clear from the post-election surveying and analysis, there were three things that won the election for the Conservatives in 2019. Three factors. The first of all was that Boris Johnson wasn't Jeremy Corbyn. So the Conservatives presented the leader that was the least toxic, the least unpopular. Neither of them were popular. No politicians are really popular these days. No senior politicians anyway. But the Conservatives presented by far and away the least unpopular. That, and you could tell that they knew that was a factor. This is the thing about the Conservatives. They knew that was a factor, because what did they do all the way through the last Parliament? They kept trying to bring out the Jeremy Corbyn defence, didn't they? They kept trying to attack Keir Starmer. Oh, you once stood next to Jeremy Corbyn. Yeah, it's not working, mate. Not even in the party. But they knew that. So that proves that they knew that Jeremy Corbyn was one of the key factors in the 2019 election. And yet, they're not joining the dots. They're not thinking to themselves, so what we need is someone who's more popular than Keir Starmer. Because if you look at what they're arranging... Now, I will grant you, they probably don't have anyone at the moment who's more popular, but they do probably have some people in the party who could be. Like, the well-known ones are all less popular because they're all arseholes, right? Priti Patel, not a chance. The other ones you could argue the don't knows are large enough that they might get away with it. But I don't think any of the current candidates will appeal to the public. In fact, there was just some new polling out from More in Common showing that the public don't really align with any of the Conservative candidates, the leadership candidates. In fact, the word weird was used. They think they're weird. We should do that. That's working against Trump. You know, we're in America calling MAGA weird. Oh, they're just weird. And it's really easy to prove. We should do that with the Conservatives. Second factor was get Brexit done. Get Brexit done wasn't about leaving the EU, by the way. It was about, because everyone who wanted to leave the EU knew that they basically needed to vote for the Conservatives. You did have some people voting for the Brexit Party in some areas as well. But you knew you weren't going to vote for any of the progressive parties for that. Get Brexit done was actually an appeal to people who didn't want to leave the EU, but were sick of the constant toxic debate. They were sick of it. And they thought that the reason why everything was going wrong in the country was because the government were paralysed by this constant discussion of Brexit. Boris Johnson promised them, as soon as we leave, it can all stop. We can focus on healthcare and schooling and policing and transport and housing and all the rest of it. He made that explicit promise. You know, all we have to do is leave the EU, then we can stop blaming Europe for everything. We can stop banging on about the EU. It's done. We've got our oven-ready deal. It's all done. We can focus on being a normal government. That is what people vote. That's what the Get Brexit Done slogan was about. It wasn't about leaving the EU. It was about stopping banging on about Brexit. And yet, what did they do? They've spent the last 5 years banging on about Brexit. There hasn't actually been much Brexit discussion in the leadership contest, I have to say, so far. But during the last Parliament, everything was Brexit. Everything was Brexit. Every policy had to be seen through the prism of Brexit. Everything was a case of, what would Brexit Jesus do? So they failed on that one as well. And then the third factor was levelling up. Well, they didn't deliver on levelling up either. You know, closing the gap between affluent and deprived areas. That gap has widened. So the three things that they know won them the election in 2019, they have failed to address. I mean, obviously, they couldn't put Jeremy Corbyn back in charge of Labour. That wasn't within their power. But it was within their power to make sure they didn't have someone with a huge disconnect with the public. It was within their power to elect a leader that could have a connection with the public. It was within their power to stop going on about Brexit. It was within, to deal with it pragmatically, which they didn't. They still used it as a culture war thing. And it was within their power to close the gap between affluent and deprived areas. Although I have to say that was always going to create a schism within their voters, because traditional Conservative voters did not want levelling up at all, because they were the ones in the affluent areas. They wanted the opposite of levelling up. But anyway, there we go. Focus group said Tugendhat is prime ministerial but posh. I think the thing with, you're going to get that with a lot of Conservatives, the posh side of it. The thing with Tugendhat, though, is if he does become leader, I don't think he's going to connect with people at all, because he is one of the ones banging on about, oh yeah, we should abandon our international obligations on human rights. So it sounds to me like ultimately, I don't think any of the candidates want to talk about any of the issues that actually matter to voters. That's the key thing. They all say they do, but then when you ask them what that is, they say immigration. It's like, okay, immigration is considered a bigger issue amongst the sort of voters the Conservatives want to appeal to. Sure, yeah, absolutely. But still, healthcare, social care, and the economy, particularly the cost of living, are top of the list. And they don't want to talk about those. Focus groups are too focused to focus. Well, there is a danger on being too reliant. The benefit of a focus group is you can get more detailed answers. So what you're supposed to do with a focus group is almost like a 3-stage process if you're going to do them properly. So you have general polling, which can only ever get general attitudes, right? So then you come up with hypotheses based on general polling. Then you get a focus group of particular people. It doesn't have to be, by the way, a focus group doesn't have to be a spread. It can actually be fully staffed, for want of a better word, populated is a better word, I suppose, by people of a particular type. But you're trying to get more detailed responses. So what you can do is you get a hypothesis. Oh, we think this. So you get a focus group. Then you can ask those people those detailed questions to sort of test it out. Then what you do, because you don't just leave it at the focus group, because that is only a small sample of people, even though it's been informed by your general polling. Then what you do is you develop another survey after it, a more general one, with some of those specific things that came up and asking more people. So focus groups can be very useful if you use them correctly. Politicians don't always use them correctly. And it could be argued at the moment that the Conservatives will struggle because they haven't got the money. They haven't got the money to really pay data scientists to tell them the detail. So, but at the same time, they don't, it would be useful if they did, for them, not for us. But there's plenty of polling that's been commissioned by someone else. More in Common, do you know what? More in Common have done so much research after this election. It's really worth looking some of their stuff up. They've done so much research into the why people voted as they did and things like that, which would be a good starting point. There's enough stuff in what they've been publishing, as well as other pollsters, which is very much in line with it, for the Conservatives to know that at the moment they're beating the wrong track. They are absolutely on the wrong path. They should, all they're doing by banging on about immigration, in fact, ironically, Priti Patel is one of the few that doesn't seem to want to talk too much about it. And she's the one that would have no chance. She's like easily the least popular. The Conservatives would be mad to make Priti Patel their leader. She's deeply unpopular. And yet, of all of them, she's probably got the most sensible attitude to immigration in terms of what she's explaining at the moment, which is mad. But all they're doing is feeding Reform UK. Reform UK have said they are going to be pushing their 2 key policies, this Parliament, what they're going to be pushing. They've already abandoned their manifesto, or their contract, as they call it. They all said, yeah, that was a load of crap, wasn't it? But they're going to be pushing immigration and low taxes. So the Conservatives will do themselves no favour by trying to fight on those on that ground, because Reform UK will always be able to offer more extreme solutions, and the Conservatives could only possibly counter Reform UK by implementing policies that get rid of the problem, but they're not in government anymore, so they don't have that option. It's now down to Labour to do that, and if Labour do that, they'll get the credit. So the Conservatives cannot fight Reform UK on a platform of either immigration or low taxes. Now, I know the Conservatives don't really have much else about them, but they can't win on those platforms. So they really shouldn't be trying. They should be moving to other things. And yet they're not doing. They're not doing. So they're going to try and be Reform UK light, because they can't be as extreme as Reform UK, because they'll lose a load more of their core support. They know that. So they, at the moment they're in a complete mess, absolute mess. So I can absolutely believe that in the coming Welsh elections, Reform UK would possibly have a chance of being the official opposition. Of all the things they say they're going to do over the next few years, that is the one, I believe, where there's a potential game plan. But there it is. So we'll have to leave it there, because unfortunately I've got to go to hospital now for a checkup, and it's some distance away. But well, thanks for coming on, everyone. Anyway, I had a good chat. Don't forget to click the like button, of course, and subscribe to the channel. And until next time, I'll see you later.